So at this point in 2025, I think it's fair to say that most big companies have moved well beyond whether or not to deploy AI. And the question now is really how ready your organization is. We have a great cross-section of industry here. And I want to use the session to unpack what AI readiness really means in practice and where the biggest gaps, in your opinion, still lie. So to each of you, when you think about AI readiness inside your organization, inside your client's organization, what does it mean? Is it mostly a technical challenge? Is it mostly a cultural challenge?
I think the first thing to say is getting ready this year has been extremely difficult. And that's because of the almost insane pace of technology innovation this year. So just give you a few examples, really. So one client we were working with, quite pioneering in only January this year, which seems like history now. The maximum number of agents you could orchestrate, so you send one to go and get data from like a mainframe, one from an application, etc., was 6, and that was only January this year. Then we saw a whole explosion. We saw things like DeepSeek training models, if you remember, had that mainstream media implosion. That was only January this year. Then we saw things like Manus AI, and we saw better engineering of agent orchestration. And then we saw these new protocols. So a thing called Model Context Protocol from Anthropic, agent to agent from Google's. And this allowed these agents now to use tools to speak to each other. And then we've seen an explosion in the parameters of the large language models increase significantly. So we went from being able to orchestrate 6 in January to early summer, it being infinite, which is a massive change. And it's not abating the change. If you just look at those of you who use Anthropic's Claude, for example, if you're a user of that, the new model that came out only in the last 2 weeks, probably a little bit less actually, was called Sonnet 4.5. One of its parameters, its published parameters, was that this model could autonomously code for up to 30 hours. And when you compare it to its previous model, which was Opus 4.0, Opus 4.0, its stated parameters were it could autonomously code for 7 hours. Now, the key thing about that was Opus 4 only came out in August. So in 8 weeks, you've gone from 7 to 30 hours. And it's not hyperbole now to talk about best-in-class technology being obsolete now. If it's best-in-class today, it can be obsolete in 12 weeks. And that's a phenomenon nobody's ever dealt with before. So, and it's not slowing down.
So what I'm hearing from you is pace of change is really one of the big ones. So, Paul, are you saying the same thing at Salesforce?
Yeah, and Patrick's absolutely right. I think there is a significant pace of change. However, I also think when we look at enterprises as a whole, there are other kind of barriers. You know, if we think about the people impact, the change management, we think about strategic alignment, we think about kind of how your processes within your organization will change as well. It's really clear that every C-level that we talk to in the C-suite, they all know that AI is going to play a crucial role in their strategy moving forward. What they're trying to now figure out is, where am I going to get value from it? Because I think if we go back, and Patrick, you were talking about the pace of change, but if we go back to November 2022, when ChatGPT launched, it was this eye-opening moment where everybody in the world, when we saw generative AI, kind of went, wow. And what we saw happen was lots of organizations immediately said, right, I need to use this technology. I need to put it to work. And there was this proliferation of proof of concepts and pilots that were spun up. And in reality, I think now fast forward to where we are today with the agentic revolution and what's coming now with agentic AI and the ability to have AI agents autonomously take action, I think there is a bit of nervousness that says, I did all those proof of concepts and pilots. How do I actually get real business value? And what we're now seeing is, we've got some great customers like Heathrow, Capita, FedEx, Accenture, who are all now using Salesforce technology to unlock that value because they've started to realize the LLMs are phenomenal, but the LLMs alone are not enough. It needs to be connected to a bigger ecosystem. You need to be able to put trust, security, governance, controls around these agents and this AI. You need to be able to also have contextual embedding. So things like retrieval augmentation generation, where you can take data objects, put it into prompts so that actually the LLMs understand what is my business? What am I trying to achieve? And I think that's quite a complex landscape to try and do. And this is where I think customers are now starting to realize, actually, it's not just the LLMs I need. I need to be part of something much bigger than this.
Okay. So we've got rapid pace of change. We've got complex rollouts that might not necessarily give you a return on your investment if you don't do it right. For WPP, it's maybe a slightly different lens. How are you thinking about that when, looking at your clients?
Well, I've been building AI solutions for almost 2 decades, and it's natural to get very excited about emerging technologies, and rightly so for generative AI, because these things are completely transformational. But what tends to happen is that we think they're a panacea and that they can solve all of our problems across our supply chain. So AI and software, there's not much difference between them. Really, the only difference between software and AI is that AI is opaque in terms of how it makes its decisions. If you can make them explainable, then it takes away that problem. But projects don't fail for AI reasons. They fail for the same reasons why software fails, because they don't have the right investment, they're not maintained, all that kind of stuff. So in WPP, we have, there are 3 things that we think are important. One is data. If you have data that contains insights that are more useful than your competition, then it's data that makes AI smart. The second is AI talent. And my company was acquired 4 years ago. We had 150 deep AI researchers, now 300. They're trying to figure out how do we apply AI across our supply chain to differentiate the marketing stack. And then leadership, it's you, it's the people listening. If you understand about the transformational technologies, if you place the right bets, then you're going to have an advantage. We see a lot of organizations ultimately trying to apply these technologies to solving the wrong problems. We're very fortunate in WPP that our leadership are all in on AI, investing now £300 million pounds a year to develop what we call WPP Open, which is a platform, end-to-end marketing platform that, yes, is differentiated in terms of its supply chain, but also deals with the governance and the security and safety, all of the things that make software successful.
Okay. So there's a few different topics that are coming up, but it sounds like the people element might be a big X factor here. There's a lot of resources happening. The change is complex. The change is fast. How do you make sure your workforce is actually ready to take this on?
I think and Daniel's absolutely right, talent, and whilst there's a lot of focus on AI and engineering talent at the moment, as Paul's mentioned as well, it's really still about change, organizational change and development. And so, yeah, you do need, there's a big shortage of AI engineers to build this stuff, but don't forget about the other things that will get adoption. That's going to be design. So a big need for people who can build the next generation of experience. Change as well. This is significant change. If you look at some of our most ambitious clients, they are talking about, they do 45 million service transactions a year. In 5 years' time, they expect 90% of those transactions to be done by agents, and they have a plan and a strategy to do that. But they actually have to now create a new organization of 20,000 people to run this technology, and it's running technology very differently because this is constantly changing technology. So even some agent stuff we've built in June, we're swapping out now because it can use a better model. It doesn't necessarily need to be on a GPU anymore. It can even be deployed at the edge. So we've seen a whole range. It's just constant change. And of course, that constant change in technology exposes security risks, service risks. And so there's a new sort of set of skills that's got to be built to actually run this stuff when you start to run it at scale. And you're starting to run it at scale, you guys in your applications and services. And it's a very different than it used to be a few years ago in running enterprise technology. So it really, a lot of organizations do spend a lot of time thinking about future talent now and the retraining and reskilling. I think IBM's report last year, IBM did a report, said there's probably 1 billion gap of skills in the global market. Yeah. So people talk about not having jobs. That's not what a lot of C-suites are talking about. A lot of C-suites are talking about, we just not got enough of the right sort of people. How do we reskill? How do we retrain?
Well, it sounds like even if you've got the skills, they're out of date really quickly. So how do you make sure your workforce is like continually leveling up?
Yeah, and I think to build on Patrick's point, I think what is absolutely crucial is this understanding of what roles are going to be there in the future, because I think there will be an augmentation, where humans and agents work together side by side. I think for us at Salesforce, one of the key things for us is some of the foundational things that need to be learnt initially, like security. Don't feed an LLM any sensitive information, that's in the public domain. Very simple kind of things there. But what we've developed now over the last 12 months is a series of learning modules that are available on Trailhead, which is our free learning platform, with the opportunity to kind of upskill people on, some of the foundational elements, because I think everything from writing really crisp prompts that get you the response first time. I mean, I've asked many customers, how many times have you used the public LLM, put a prompt in, and then went, it's not quite the answer I was looking for, and then you suddenly you reword your prompt, you recraft it. Those are skills, soft skills, that I think we're going to learn how we interact with this technology over time. And then I think as it evolves, there is a lot more that I think as the changes come, we need to figure out, what are the roles, what are the jobs to be done. The Industrial Revolution didn't eradicate jobs. It just gave people a different focus or a different role. And I think we're seeing ourselves in this agentic AI era of a great opportunity. The IDC reported that, similar to IBM, they said there's probably going to be 500,000 new jobs created in the Salesforce ecosystem alone from agentic AI. When we think about that, this is not a replacement of those skilled individuals. This is an augmentation. But there is still a nervousness in enterprises that I see today that people are going, it's going to take my job. So we have to educate and actually talk and look at those use cases that are going to add value to the individuals within the organization.
Now, I know the advertising industry in particular might be a bit sensitive about AI coming in. How do you sort of build the culture around that from your group?
Well, first of all, I think the marketing industry is expected to be at the forefront of using these technologies and then helping our clients understand how to utilize them. So actually, we've been very fortunate that our employees have embraced these technologies completely through our platform. Out of the 100,000 plus employees that we have 70,000 people using these technologies internally. We have a dual strategy. One is a self-serve model. So we want to put these tools in the hands of our employees to build agents, to utilize these technologies, to understand how to make their work more efficient, more effective. And obviously you have to do that in a safe way. You don't want people building software or agents that can go rogue and do silly things. So making sure that they put the right guardrails of protection, safety, security around the self-serve model has been a really interesting challenge. But now there are, I think, 50,000 agents operating across our business. And then we have another strategy, which is to identify the needs across our back office and our front office for agents, for AI. And then we have a team of people making sure that those models are trained, they're appropriate for solving that problem. And then what we can do is we can then make those models available to everybody. So now, for example, we can train a model on the data, the intelligence of our creatives or people are experts in understanding segmentation. And we can now make that model available to everybody, and it can then supercharge their job. So we've seen a mass adoption of AI, and I'll just continue.
Now, I'm interested particularly in your group internally, because you've become part of a much bigger company, and your group has become much bigger. And it's become a key part of that group's overall AI strategy. How are you dealing with that internally? How do you make sure that you're using those resources and that you're scaling correctly, and that your innovations are getting across the organization and not getting lost?
Yeah, so Satalia actually, which was acquired by WPP, didn't actually have a marketing background before the acquisition. Well, what we understood is how to identify frictions across supply chains, opportunities to apply algorithms to innovate organizations. And so there's no secret magic bullet. You identify the frictions, and then you start knocking them off one by one, and then making sure that you're building your data infrastructure, AI infrastructure over time. So you're driving value value solving problems, placing the right bets, making, again, sure you're using the right algorithms. And generative AI is just one flavor of algorithms. There are lots of other algorithms out there, from machine learning to optimization. And it's really about understanding what the right technologies are for solving the right problem.
Okay. And I think that leads me to the next set of questions that I wanted to get into, which is governance and risk, and who actually should own the AI risk in an organization. Patrick, how do you advise clients to think through this?
So I think risk comes in many forms. Obviously, there's technology risk, but there's also many other risks, and usually caused by humans more than the technology in most cases. We've seen it play out in business risk. I mean, there was a company last week that had to pay a significant fine because it clearly looked at generative AI to create a client deliverable, which was inaccurate. That wasn't a technology. That's just a lack of process. That's just, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have not been looking at the intern's outputs before you sent it to a client. It's not. So you've got risks of service. We're seeing risks of, obviously, security. Every agent becomes a vulnerability and needs to be managed. And then we're seeing risks of competitive risks. So there's a high degree of FOMO out there at the moment, and that's driving a lot. People are getting really fearful of the risk of their competitors outpacing them in this field as you see these continual innovations. So it's lots of risk. People are starting to work out how to manage this. For example, to manage agents that are compliant, we now see in technologies where you can take policy documents and you can convert them into code. And that becomes the guardrails for which agents will comply with. So particularly in places like where governments, financial services, etc., have a requirement to be compliant, they're starting to see some of the technology as a way of improving their compliance even better than the humans are not particularly compliant, by the way. Otherwise we wouldn't drink alcohol and we wouldn't eat sugar and things like that. We're not compliant. We don't do the right things or even things we're told to do. So, but we're starting to see a next level of people getting compliance and things like that at the moment.
Is there a danger in having the AI regulate itself? At what point do you have to have a human in the loop here?
Yeah, it's more humans in control than in the loop, to be frank. Yeah, nobody wants total autonomy. Even if you look at the biggest adoption of AI at the moment, which is probably in software coding, nobody wants an agent that's going to go away for 20 minutes autonomously and come back with 1,000 lines of code. They want that continual check-in that you would have if you had a junior developer working with you to say, what do you think of this? And nobody needs that. So it's not necessarily about humans in the loop. The reality, it's got to be humans in control, just like it is now, just a hierarchy of different services and people and structures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with that, it's about observability. It's about observability across where your agents execute, what tasks, and making sure that there's clear accountability. Because I think, to Patrick's point, vibe coding being a terminology now that's kind of emerged quite rapidly. You don't want 1,000 lines of code for a human to review, but you do want the observability, and you want to understand if there was any proprietary software used in that kind of process, whether they sourced the original information. And Daniel, you mentioned explainability. I think these are absolutely key terms when we think about designing AI architecture that we have to put in the forefront of it. And it's probably going to get a little bit more complicated when we get into the world of agent to agent, kind of the MCP protocols and how do agents offhand or offset to another agent? Because then it's what do they do with that information? So, if there is any kind of, again, how do you minimize the risk associated with it? Control the security, control the controllables. Don't put any personalized identifiable information in an agent to agent kind of handoff. So I think what is absolutely crucial, but remained true for the last 20 years of any architectural kind of design principles, how do we apply security by design? How do we do the exact same thing when we deploy our agents in the field?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you've used the word junior a lot, and I think that right now, I think of a large language model as a little bit like a graduate. 10 years ago, it was like a toddler. It regurgitated some words. Most of it didn't make sense. We're seeing that graduate now move to like a master's level. Maybe, next year we'll have a PhD level, in a few years, a postdoc. And by the end of this decade, it's predicted that we'll have a professor in our pocket. But you should ask yourself right now, would I deploy a graduate to go and solve that problem? And if the answer is no, then you probably should be careful about deploying AI. When I deploy AI in production, I ask myself three things. The first thing is the intent appropriate? Is this the right thing to do? And really, this is an ethics question. And there are already standards and structures and processes set up to scrutinize intent. AI doesn't have intent. Human beings have intent, and that's what needs to get scrutinized. The second one is explainability. And if you can make your algorithms explainable, then that can help a lot with regulation, but it also can help a lot in extracting insights that allow you to make better decisions. So, the power of agents is a concept called multi-agent reasoning. Agents have been around for a long time. So if I've got an agent over here that knows that Socrates is a man, and an agent over here that knows that all men are mortal, by getting them to talk to each other, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. I can infer new knowledge that's really useful for my business. Now, if I only sort of knew that Socrates is a man and was semi-confident that all men are mortal, how do I deal with that influence and inference? And the challenge is, how do you make sure you're not propagating incorrect information across your organization? And that's where explainability is critical. And the final question you need to ask yourself, which is a bit strange, is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As an engineer, we think about, failure points, and we try to mitigate those risks when we're deploying software. But you now need to ask yourself, what happens if my AI goes very right? For the first time ever, you can build technology that can massively overachieve the goal that you've given it, and that actually can cause harm elsewhere in the supply chain. So you need now to make sure that you're looking holistically about the application of AI, not just to one part of your business, but the whole.
Okay, we're running low on time, so maybe a lightning round. If you had to advise a client to invest in one thing tomorrow to be the most AI ready for the next year, we'll say. Anything further out than that feels unrealistic, given the pace of change. What would it be, Paul?
I think explore your service domain. When we think about kind of consumer needs and consumer wants, there is an opportunity to absolutely delight your customers. And I think we've all just talked about some of the challenges and some of the things to be aware of with AI, but please do not walk away from here understanding the value this can drive for your business. If we think about NPS scores, CSAT improvement, and just delighting your customer with an incredible service, it's really easy to do now with the agentic capabilities, having an always on capability. No longer do I need to pick up the phone and sit in a queue somewhere waiting for a human agent to become available. I can get straight through to an agent in an agentic capacity who can take action and fulfill tasks on my behalf. So I would say, look at the service domain, look at your consumers, look at one thing that would delight them, and start there.
Okay, Daniel.
Very quickly, I think come to these events, educate leadership in understanding to make sure to place the right bets, to not just go after quick wins and low-hanging fruit. Most likely, they're not going to differentiate your business. Focus on applying AI to solving problems that are going to disrupt your business from your competitors.
Patrick.
I would say be maniacal about the skills of the organisation. Act like a 4-star general does in the organisation that focuses on skills and training because they do mission critical stuff. A general executive thinks it's a home HR issue. Executives need to focus on the skills and talent in their organisation to be future ready.